High-achieving women do not get stuck with low-effort men because they do not know their worth. They get stuck because they are too capable for the relationship to expose the problem early. You are emotionally literate. You are self-aware. You regulate. You communicate clearly. You anticipate breakdown before it happens. You soften conflict. You repair quickly. You adjust. You carry momentum. And without realizing it, you remove every point of friction that would have required a man to rise. Men do not evolve because you are impressive. They evolve because staying the same costs them something. If your presence stabilizes the relationship no matter what he does, he never has to grow, he just has to stay. This episode is for the woman who keeps thinking he knows better while continuing to make it easy for him to do less. Because knowing better has never changed behavior, pressure does. And high-achieving women are experts at absorbing pressure instead of letting it land where it belongs. Your competence is not inspiring him, it's insulating him. Every time you hold the emotional frame, smooth the rupture, translate the disappointment into something digestible, or give grace with that recalibration, you quietly teach the relationship that effort is optional. You don't need him to show up because you already are. That doesn't make you powerful in the dynamic, it makes you structural support. High-achieving women mistake being essential for being desired. They confuse stability with attraction. They assume because they are respected, they are also being met. Respect without consequence turns into reliance, and reliance kills desire. Because you can carry discomfort without collapsing, the relationship never has to correct itself. It just keeps pulling you away from your capacity. This is how bare minimum becomes invisible. Not because men are malicious, but because you never let the cost surface. I'm Megan Webster. I'm an abuse recovery coach, a trauma-informed strategist, and the woman a narcissist hopes to never meet twice. This is the Narcissist's Worst Nightmare podcast, where women stop self-abandoning through competence and start leading relationships through discernment, power, and consequence. This episode is for women who are tired of doing everything right and still ending up with men who plateau, drift, or quietly stop trying. It's not because you're too much, it's because you are doing too much. This is not going to be a cute pep talk. This is a confrontation. If you are high achieving, you do not need more confidence, communication skills, or another framework to explain why something hurts. You must stop compensating for environments that should be self-correcting. This episode is for women who keep mistaking her emotional intelligence for leadership when what she's actually doing is absorbing the cost of someone else's stagnation. High achieving women bring structure into relationships without even thinking about it. You communicate clearly, you self-regulate instead of escalating, you give grace, you assume good intent, you contextualize behavior, you repair instead of rupture, and those traits are powerful. They are also the fastest way to teach a man that effort is optional. When you compensate for inconsistency, you normalize it. When you emotionally regulate for two, you remove the need for him to self-correct. When you adapt faster than he evolves, the relationship stabilizes at its lowest required output. Not because he's lazy, but because your system works. Men do not change in response to standards you hold internally. They change in response to consequences they feel externally. If your nervous system absorbed disappointment before it ever reaches him, the relationship never demands more. High-achieving women do not train men through what they say, they train men through what continues to be uninterrupted. And most men will stay exactly where the floor is if the ceiling is never enforced. Your emotional maturity becomes a liability when it shields other people from feedback. You don't see yourself as compensating, you see yourself as being reasonable, flexible, secure. But from the nervous system perspective, the relationship has no incentive to evolve. Everything keeps working. High-achieving women don't tolerate dysfunction, they reorganize around it. And reorganization is what locks those patterns in. The relationship does not need him to change because you have already adjusted. Overfunctioning is not a dating habit, it is a survival imprint. If you learned early that stability depended on your awareness, your maturity, your emotional intelligence, your ability to manage environments, your body equates effort with safety. You don't wait to see who someone is, you move immediately into contribution. You explain, you clarify, you adjust, you hold the emotional tone, you bridge gaps, you smooth transitions. This feels loving because it's familiar. Your nervous system believes that if you stay ahead of the issues, nothing will fall apart. If you handle it early, nobody gets upset. If you carry more, things stay stable. But stability created through overfunctioning is not connection, it's containment. Where you lead with effort, you remove the need for him to offer any. Where you preempt discomfort, you eliminate the feedback loop that teaches someone to self-regulate. self-regulate. Effort offered too early becomes expectation later, and once effort becomes expected, it's no longer valued. Overfunctioning creates this illusion of intimacy while starving attraction. Your body is working so hard to keep your nervous system smooth that it never gets to rest into being chosen. You confuse being relied on with being desired, being needed with being met, and then you wonder why you feel lonely in a relationship that looks stable from the outside. It's not because you picked wrong, it's because you carried too much too soon. I mentioned this earlier and I do want to speak on it. Men rise to the floor you set, not the ceiling you imagine. This is where the fantasy ideas quietly get replaced by data. You see his potential, his intelligence, you could see how he could show up with the right support, the right communication, the right patience, and you believe that your standards will pull him upward because that is how you operate. But relationships do not run on projection, they run on structure. Men rise to the minimum requirement to maintain access. If access remains while standards are explained instead of enforced, the message is unmistakable. You don't need to meet me there, I will come to you. This is how bare minimum becomes normalized, not through disrespect, but through generosity without boundaries. High-achieving women are dangerous in this dynamic. You make it easy to stay the same. Your standards only exist at the point where the behavior stops compensating. Potential is seductive because it lets you delay reality. It allows you to stay invested without demanding evidence. It gives you something to hope for while nothing actually changes. But potential does not build relationships, requirements do. Men don't rise because you believe in them. They rise when the system no longer works without them. So instead of explaining, we need to replace that with consequence. High-achieving women are excellent explainers. You articulate nuance, you name patterns, you offer insight, you believe understanding creates change. Understanding creates awareness. It does not create urgency. When every misstep is followed by a conversation instead of a consequence, the nervous system on the other side does not register risk. There's no reason for it to adjust. Explaining sounds mature, healthy, it looks regulated, but in early dating, explanation often replaces accountability. If the relationship improves only when you clarify, guide, or emotionally translate, you are not being met, you are managing. Management is not attraction, it is unpaid labor. Men do not feel compelled to rise inside your systems that already function without them. Explanation keeps you in the relationships longer than evidence ever would. It allows you to feel active instead of honest, and it gives you something to do instead of something to decide. But every explanation without a consequence is teaching the same lesson. Nothing changes unless you decide it does. I work with a client who is highly successful, emotionally grounded, warm, direct, and deeply self-aware. She kept ending up in relationships where men started super strong and slowly drifted into passivity. She told me, I don't understand this at all. I communicate everything super clearly. And she did. That was the problem. Every time effort dropped, she checked in calmly. Every time a boundary was crossed, she clarified gently. Every time inconsistency appeared, she reassured while naming her needs. These men were not abusive, but they were comfortable. There was no moment where effort was required to maintain access. She kept the emotional system running regardless of his contribution. When she stopped explaining and started responding with distance instead of insight, everything shifted. And it's not because she became cold, it's because her system finally demanded participation. Men don't respond to intelligence, they respond to structure. High-achieving women are uniquely susceptible to verbal repair. When a man says he understands, that he sees it now, that he didn't realize, your nervous system loosens because resolution feels imminent. Awareness sounds like movement. Language mimics change. You hear intention and assume trajectory, but intention without cost is static. And most men are not lying when they say they want to do better. They genuinely believe that insight is effort. The issue is structural. Nothing in the environment requires the effort to become embodied. Access remains intact. Emotional safety remains intact, and you remain present, so the promise never has to land. High-achieving women mistake sincerity for accountability. You hear emotional fluency and assume responsibility has been taken. You confuse reflection with repair. You reward verbal ownership with continued closeness. But growth is not what someone says they understand. Growth is what someone sustains when comfort is removed. If there's no consequence when follow-up fails, the nervous system on the other side learns something precise. Words are sufficient, and because you can metabolize disappointment quietly, your system never corrects itself. And attraction does not erode because men lose interest. It erodes because the risk disappears. Desire requires orientation towards something that could be lost. When access is guaranteed regardless of behavior, the body stops reaching. There's no sharpening, no pursuit, no forward lean. High-achieving women stabilize relationships unconsciously. You maintain contact through withdrawal. You bridge silence. You initiate repair. You hold continuity when effort drops. From his nervous system's perspective, nothing is threatened. And from your body's perspective, something is wrong. Irritation creeps in. Desires dull. You feel less wanted while being more relied on. It's not a coincidence. Attraction cannot survive inside of systems where one person carries momentum. It requires two nervous systems leaning forward. When effort is optional, desire becomes abstract. You don't feel chosen because nothing is required to choose you. Here's the part that a lot of people will miss because no one explains attraction this way. The nervous system does not register care through intention. It registers care through cost. When effort costs nothing, it doesn't matter how sincere it sounds. The body doesn't respond to promise, it responds to pressure. When you compensate with withdrawal, you erase the condition that would have created pursuit. When you initiate repair after distance, you remove the signal that absence was consequence. When you keep continuity alive, no matter how little is offered, you teach the relationship that desire is not required for access. This is why attraction fades quietly instead of dramatically. Nothing goes wrong. There's no blow up, no betrayal, just a slow flattening where you feel less wanted while becoming more useful. Your body notices the imbalance long before your mind wants to name it. Men do not stop desiring because they don't care. They stop desiring when the system no longer asks them to move. And you don't struggle to hold the standard because you lack self-respect. You struggle because enforcing them destabilizes the system. High-achieving women are rewarded for adaptability. You learn that flexibility kept things moving, that steadiness prevented fallout, that absorbed strain was safer than creating rupture. So when something isn't working, your instinct is to adjust yourself instead of interrupting the dynamic. Enforcement feels excessive. You worry you're overreacting. You minimize the impact and you tell yourself it's just not worth the conflict. But what you call minor is often the exact moment the relationship teaches someone how much effort is required to keep you. Standards only function when they interrupt comfort. If enforcing them feels uncomfortable, that discomfort is not a red flag. It's evidence that the standard is finally structural. What's happening here is not a lack of confidence, it's a fear of destabilization. High-achieving women aren't afraid of being alone. They're afraid of disorder. Your nervous system learned early that when systems break down, you have to work harder to hold them. So enforcing standards feels reckless. It feels like choosing chaos, like you're creating a problem instead of solving one. But relationships do not recalibrate through accommodation. They recalibrate through interruption. And if nothing is interrupted, then nothing can be renegotiated. This is where women confuse being reasonable with being self-respecting. You stay flexible, understanding, regulated, and the relationship quietly learns that your comfort matters less than continuity. Standards that never create friction never create change. There is a very big difference between boundaries and consequences. Most high-achieving women are excellent at boundaries. You state clearly, you articulate expectations, you communicate limits with composure. What's missing here is consequence. A boundary without consequence is a preference. A boundary followed by an explanation instead of a behavioral change is information only. A boundary that never alters access teaches nothing. Consequences are not meant to be punishments. They are environmental shifts. They say this dynamic no longer works, and the behavior reorganizes to match the truth. It's not about ultimatums, emotional escalation, or demands. You need to stop making it easy to remain unchanged. Men don't change when they are educated. They change when the environment requires it. High-achieving women often mistake clarity for effectiveness. You think that if you explain a boundary well enough, it should matter. But nervous systems do not reorganize around words. They reorganize around loss, absence, and adjustment. If access stays the same, so does the system. Consequences do not have to be dramatic, but they do have to be consistent. Less availability, less emotional labor, a change in how much access someone has to your presence. Again, this is not punishment, this is honesty. When nothing changes after a boundary is stated, the message is clear. The boundary was informational, not structural. So what do you actually need to do differently? It's not about becoming less capable. You need to stop compensating. You don't need to communicate better. You need to enforce earlier. You don't need to explain your standards. You need to live them. Let effort meet effort. Let silence stand long enough to speak. Let inconsistency encounter distance. Let confusion exist until it reveals truth. This is not manipulation, it is integrity. When you stop absorbing the cost as someone else's underperformance, the relationship will organize again on its own. And whatever emerges is always kinder than staying stuck in imagined potential. What this actually requires is restraint, not withdrawal or coldness, structural restraint, the ability to tolerate discomfort without rushing to fix it. High-achieving women are addicted to resolution. You want things smooth, clarified, and settled, but clarity without consequence only preserves imbalance. When you allow space to remain unresolved, the relationship tells the truth. Either effort rises to meet you or distance exposes misalignment. Both outcomes restore self-respect. Both end the cycle of carrying more than your share. You don't need to do more. You need to stop doing what was never yours to carry in the first place. High-achieving women don't end up with bare minimum men because they lack discernment. They end up there because they make excellence unnecessary. Stop training men through tolerance and start witnessing the structure. If this episode cracks something open in you, good. That means you are finally seeing where competence has been costing you desire. Share this with another woman who keeps doing everything right and still feels underchosen. Hit follow so you don't miss the next episode. And I know you're ready to stop self-abandoning through overfunctioning and start leading relationships with consequence and power. This is the work we do inside of the Black Cat Academy. You do not need to try harder. You need to stop carrying what's not yours.